Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let's hop across the pond. Now, PMQs. Questions to the Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah, I love it. Let me check my sound, make sure everything is okay. If you guys enjoy the content, of course, share, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And of course, you can always support and help the content through Patreon or Super Chat. Questions to the Prime Minister. So there's a bit of palace intrigue that's been taking place. The EU withdrawal bill is being drawn up and there are amendments that are being added to it. One of the key points that is being fought over is this thing of a meaningful vote. Meaning at the end of the Brexit process, there are certain people in the House of Lords and in Commons that are concerned that of a no deal Brexit. They're concerned that the government will say, we don't have a deal, so screw it. We're going to just leave without it. And so those people have been pushing back on what the government has been trying to do. So the same way we have a House of Representatives and a Senate, it's kind of odd. It's kind of like that, but not. The Lords aren't necessarily elected representatives. They used to be these kind of people of king advisors. The Commons became more prevalent for obvious reasons. They're the people who are elected. And yet still there's certain regulations that go along the way with the House of Lords. So, legislation is being sent from the House of Lords to the Commons that says Parliament gets a meaningful vote if you don't get a deal. Meaning if you can't get a deal, we still get the vote on what takes place at the end of that process. Government doesn't like this, because the government says you're tying our hands. Now, this is to some degree right. This is in an odd way somewhat of an end run. You have some people who are Remainers who don't want to leave the EU in a single market. If you don't want to leave the EU, then there is no Brexit. So I understand what they're saying from the standpoint of being concerned, but if you don't leave the EU, there's not a Brexit. Now, yes, they're trying to get a deal. They're trying to make that work. But that first part's true. Now, they want to have their cake and eat it too, which I don't necessarily know how they can pull off. Nevertheless, they want the government to get a deal, and they're saying, if you don't get a deal, let Parliament get a vote. So, that's where we are. This idea of a meaningful vote. You also have some people who are pissed off because they thought the government lied to them. Meaning this amendment was going to come up before the amendment was tabled. And yet, the amendment was put down when they thought the government said, we'll rewrite this in order to make this more applicable to what you're thinking. And then when the government puts the bill out, it's nothing like they were thinking. So there's been a little drama that's been taking place. Also, Theresa May has been running around the country telling people that they were going to get a dividend back on Brexit. Meaning we're going to get all of this money back on Brexit and we're going to be swimming in this money and we're just going to put it in the NHS. And you find out not so much. Not only are they not going to be able to get money back to put in the NHS, they are going to lose money. Britain is going to take an economic hit. So right off the bat, you're talking about somewhat of a loss of economic productivity. Then on top of that, companies, businesses, less tax. They're not going to get the money that they said they were going to get. So what Theresa May was running around saying that they were going to get as a plus is now going to be a minus that is going to have to make up from the standpoint of them either borrowing money or raising taxes. It's been weird. The ping pong thing is more interesting to me. And by the way, even with the ping pong thing, the EU still has to accept whatever they come up with as a exit package. So this is dramatic. A lot of wood to chop. Yes, and I hope I did it justice. So let's go to PMQ's Jeremy Corbyn. And by the way, when Galloway comes, I've invited Galloway. He said he'll come onto the show. Sure, brother. I'll come onto the show. Brother. The whole interview is going to be him like, yeah, brother. No, brother. I'm joking. No, he said he's coming onto the show so he can help with some of the explanation. And I have a lot of questions from the standpoint of the SNP, this idea of breaking up the EU and Scotland, Brexit from the standpoint of the left, and whether or not his perspective on Brexit has changed based on the factors that are taking place, meaning it is clear that Britain is going to take a hit. So, with all these things in play, let's take a look at Parliament. Because, by the way, they need to resolve that. They need to resolve the thing between the House of Lords and the Commons. And what does that mean from the standpoint of legislation if the House of Lords can stymie legislation? And by the way, even from the standpoint of an end vote on Brexit, the government had to give way to people who wanted to get an end vote, meaning they can get a yay or a nay. Meaning you can have a potential end vote where they're like, oh my God, this is a monstrosity, and the government gets voted down. In which case you may end up with no deal, Brexit. In which case you're back to, will the people get a vote or not? They are terrified that this is going to be the scenario and the government would just say fuck all and try to leave and abandon the process without getting a deal. It's fascinating. An unelected body is, for the most part, holding an elected body in check. So, let's take a look at PMQs. Jeremy Corbyn, Theresa May. Let's go.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in welcoming my friend Imam Mahmoud for coming here today and for the enormous humanity and presence of mind he showed on that terrible day a year ago when he prevented violence from breaking out on the streets of my constituency. And I thank him and all the religious leaders in the local community who did so much to bind people together. As a country, we should be bound together in condemning racism in any form wherever it arises. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the Prime Minister mentioned the Windrush generation, and I too join her in commemorating that event when the Windrush generation arrived in this country. I hope the hostile environment will be put behind us and that we will take this special moment today to welcome a daughter of the Windrush generation as a new member of this House, the Member of Parliament for Lewisham East. She brings enormous experience to this House in dealing with the problems of poverty and dislocation in her borough, and she'll make a great contribution to this House. Mr. Speaker, today marks World Refugee Day, a time to reflect on the human misery of 65 million refugees displaced across the globe. There is a responsibility on all political leaders to both aid refugees and act to tackle the crises and the conflicts that are driving this vast movement of people. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said that well, thank you. The Prime Minister has said extra funding for the National Health Service will come from three sources: Brexit, economic growth and the taxation system. Well, there can be no Brexit dividend before 2022. Economic growth is the slowest since 2009. So, which taxes are going up?
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, he mentioned a number of issues in his opening question. Can I first of all take this opportunity? Can I first of all take this opportunity of saying that I was struck when I visited Finsbury Park Mosque after the attack by the very close work that was being done by a number of faith leaders in that community. I commend them for the work that they're doing, that they were doing then, that I know they continue to do, and that we see being done in other communities, including my own community in my constituency in Maidenhead. The Right Honourable Gentleman ended up by asking a question on the National Health Service. So can I be very clear about this? We have set out a long-term plan for the NHS. That is securing the future for the National Health Service. We have set a 5-year funding settlement. That will be funded. There will be money that we are no longer sending to the EU that we will be able to spend on our NHS. Well, honourable members may shout about this. I know that issue is not the policy of the Labour Party frontbench. In relation to money we're no longer sending to the EU being spent on the NHS, the Shadow Housing Secretary called it bogus. The Shadow Health Secretary said it's a deceit. But perhaps I can tell them what another Labour member said a few weeks ago. He said, "We will use the funds returned from Brussels after Brexit to invest in our public services." It was him, the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the opposition.
Theresa May has been running around. There's a bus that's been riding around saying you get, $315 million a week that's going to the NHS. And they were making the point that this money will come back to us, and when it comes back to us, we'll be able to invest it in a health service. That has turned out to be completely untrue. Completely, unequivocally untrue. Everything that I've seen up to this point is said that is untrue, and she is still pushing that particular line. But okay, yeah, blame Jeremy Corbyn. Let's keep going.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased the Prime Minister's reading my speeches so closely. I said that the money sent to the EU should be ring-fenced to replace structural funds to regions, agriculture and fishing industry support, funding for research and for universities. Mr. Speaker, could I remind the Prime Minister the question I asked was about taxation to deal with her NHS promises at the weekend. Last year, she might care to forget last summer actually, but she wrote in the Conservative manifesto, firms and households cannot plan ahead with the threat of unspecified higher taxes. By her own admission, households and businesses need to plan. So can she be straight with people? Which taxes are going up and for who?
So I say to the right honourable gentleman, as I said on Monday, my right honourable friend the Chancellor will set out the full funding package. We're going to listen to people properly. He will set it out properly before the spending review. But I'm interested that the right honourable gentleman has now confirmed that the Labour Party thinks there will be money coming back from the European Union. I have to say, I think that there will be one circumstance in which there will be no money coming back from the European Union. That's if we adopted Labour's policy of getting a deal at whatever the price.
Mr. Speaker, at the weekend, the Prime Minister said there will be about 600 million a week more being spent on the NHS in cash. That will be through the Brexit dividend. Well, our net contribution to the European Union is about 8.5 billion a year. 600 million a week is over 30 billion a year. Mr. Speaker, her figures are so dodgy they belong on the side of a bus. We expect...
They were on the side of a bus.
We do expect that from the Foreign Secretary, but why is the Prime Minister pushing her own Mickey Mouse figures?
Here's the thing. I'm interrupting him for the moment, but he's right about that. These numbers are laughable. In one source after the next, her numbers don't add up at all. I'm amazed that she's standing there with a straight face still pushing this as if this is some kind of real thing. These numbers are bogus. They're dodgy numbers, as they would say. They fudge these numbers magnificently. The amount of money that she's talking about getting back. Look, in fact, I need to pull up one of those videos, but I'm just making the point that he's right about this. He's completely right, unequivocally, unimpeachably right. I've yet to see a source that has made this point of what her numbers are as being real. Those numbers are dodgy at best, and yet she's there defending them. Let's keep going. I'm interrupting him, but I just want to make this point that as a fact check, while this is taking place, Jeremy Corbyn is completely right about her numbers being dodgy. Let's keep going. The numbers are dodgy. I like it.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he thanked me earlier for reading his speeches. Can I just Labour's policy of getting a deal at whatever the price?
Mr. Speaker, at the weekend, the Prime Minister said there will be about 600 million a week more being spent on the NHS in cash. That will be through the Brexit dividend. Well, our net contribution to the European Union is about 8.5 billion a year. 600 million a week is over 30 billion a year. Mr. Speaker, her figures are so dodgy, they belong on the side of a bus. We expect that from the Foreign Secretary, but why is the Prime Minister pushing her own Mickey Mouse figures?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he thanked me earlier for reading his speeches. Can I just suggest that he, or perhaps his researchers, should spend a little more time carefully reading and listening to what I actually say on these matters. He has claimed that I said that by 2023-24, there would be 600 million more in cash terms per week being spent on the NHS from the Brexit dividend. No, I didn't say that. What I said was the following. There will indeed be £600 million more, around £600 million more, being spent on the NHS every week in cash terms as a result of a decision taken by this Conservative government to secure the future of the NHS. That will partly be funded by the money we no longer spend on the European Union. And as a country, we will be contributing a bit more. We will listen to views on that, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, my right honourable friend, will bring forward that package before the spending review.
Did you hear that? She said, we will contribute a bit more. Look, I don't necessarily know if they disagree with the world in this case, meaning the way they're looking at the world and they're coming to some kind of disagreement on the facts. I don't think they're disagreeing on the facts. I think they're disagreeing on the narrative that they're trying to associate with those facts. Jeremy Corbyn is asking her a question that she doesn't want to answer. How much are you raising taxes? You said you were getting a dividend, and you said you were going to use that dividend to put into the NHS. The NHS requires more cash. You've starved it. You need to essentially replenish the NHS just to keep it going, just to keep it up to date. What are you going to get that money from? Now, you find out that that dividend is not going to be a dividend at all. So you ask the next question. Okay, that money is not coming back. That $650 million that you were talking about was dodgy digits. How are you going to pay for the NHS? How are you going to get the money? Are you going to borrow it, or are you going to raise taxes? And if you're going to raise taxes, by how much and who? The logic is perfect. It makes perfect sense. How are you going to pay for the things that your citizenry requires? So it sounds like she just said we are going to have to contribute a little bit more. Now at that point, it's almost a capitulation, and it's a fight over the narrative. Well, look, we're going to get something back. And with the money we get back, we're going to have to contribute a tad, tepid, tiny little bit to it. Question becomes, how much is that little bit? And is that a tax? And if it's a tax, who's it on? And if that's true, then what Jeremy Corbyn is asking her is right. She just doesn't want to say it in the harsh terms in the way that he's putting it. Let's keep going. I'm fascinated by this. This is an awesome debate. But it's a wrestling match over how to characterize what's going to take place after we leave. And bringing her to account of, you misled the public on the amount of money that you said was coming back. Let's keep going.
But I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, if he is so concerned about people's taxation and what they're spending in tax. Why is it that when we increase the personal allowance and have taken nearly 4 million people out of paying income tax altogether, he and the Labour Party opposed it?
Mr. Speaker, last night the Prime Minister sent an email to Conservative members telling them, and I quote,
I want you to notice something, by the way. This is a phenomena that I notice when these take place. Jeremy Corbyn hits her with something. And whether it was Jeremy Corbyn or anyone else, this is probably something they picked up as a strategy as they do these PMQs. She rhetorically hits him with a question. Jeremy Corbyn gets up and ignores the question. The reason I think he ignores it is because this is Prime Minister questions. This is not questions to the opposition. I am asking you questions. So whatever you hurl at me is never going to get answered. It's going to just wash across me. Now, there are some times where I've seen him answer a question, but that's only when he's been pushed and pissed off, where he's confronting something that's being put to him. But oftentimes, he just ignores whatever she asks him. She asks him something. This is not questions to the opposition. I love that. I find that so badass. My first response would be to answer the question. Jeremy Corbyn resists that and just ignores it. Let me roll back a little bit so you can hear the whole thing.
We'll bring forward that package before the spending review. But I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, if he is so concerned about people's taxation and what they're spending in tax, why is it that when we increase the personal allowance and have taken...
Last night, the Prime Minister sent an email to Conservative members telling them, and I quote, the money we now send to the EU will go to the NHS. The government's own Office of Budget Responsibility says they won't see any dividend until at least 2023. The Prime Minister talks about a strong economy, but economic growth last year was the slowest of any major economy and already been downgraded this year. So if growth doesn't meet expectations, does that mean, this is the question, does that mean extra borrowing or higher mystery taxes?
Answer the question. Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, it is the balanced approach that this government takes to our economy which has enabled us, they all groan, they don't like to hear actually, that there is a fundamental difference between us, because we do believe in keeping taxes.
They all groan.
We do believe in putting money into our public services, and we also believe in dealing with our debt and making sure that we get debt falling. What would the Labour Party do? The Labour Party wouldn't have money to put in the National Health Service because the Labour Party would bankrupt our economy. And yes, if we're talking...
She's not answering that question, by the way. If you've noticed, she's not going to answer that question. You don't want to answer that question. That is a difficult question to answer. Even though what he's asking her is right. It's absolutely right. We need additional funds to pay for our NHS. How are you going to pay for it? Are you going to borrow, or are you going to raise taxes? And if you're going to raise taxes, on who? You told us, it was on the side of a bus, that you were going to get $350 million back. You jumped the shark on an interview with Andrew Marr and said, no, it will be $600 million a week. Now, as Jeremy Corbyn was kind of making a point, that doesn't even equal up to the amount of money that you guys send to the EU. Not to mention, you won't even get it until, 2022, something to that effect. So how are you going to pay for the NHS? This is an uncomfortable question. Are you going to raise taxes, Theresa May, the person who hates taxes? Her response, we're going to take a balanced approach, is a non-answer. That's the point I'm trying to tell you. Over and over again, he's asking her the same question over and over and over. Just this damning question that lingers in the air. You said we were going to get money back. We didn't get money back. We are going to take a hit. How are you going to pay for the NHS? What are you going to do? Taxes or borrowing? God, I love that question. Let's keep going. It's just an awesome way to deal with the situation. We caught you saying something that wasn't true. Now, the consequences of what you just said that wasn't true means X. She's saying we're going to take a balanced approach. I understand, but what does that mean? What does that mean? Are you raising taxes or are you increasing spending? I love it. She's quoting a buzzsaw.
Talking about the amount of money that's being put into the NHS, let's just look at what the Labour Party offered at the last election. The Labour Party said that 2.2% more growth for the NHS would make it the envy of the world. Well, I have to say to my honourable and right honourable friends, I chose not to listen to that. We're not putting 2.2% growth in, we're putting 3.4% growth in.
Jeremy Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, under Labour, the NHS increase would have been 5% this year. And the IFS confirmed that in this year there would be 7.7 billion more for the NHS. And what's her offer? A promise of £394 million per week without saying where any of it is coming from, apart from these mysterious phantom taxes that the Chancellor is presumably dreaming up at this very moment. But, Mr. Speaker, there is a human element to all issues surrounding the National Health Service and public spending. Let me give you an example. Virginia wrote to me last week and she says, my diabetic daughter has fallen down on 4 occasions in the last month. She now has both legs in plaster and is being told there isn't enough money for the NHS to give her a wheelchair. Mr. Speaker, the IFS studies say the NHS needs 3.3% just to maintain current provision, which I remind her are at crisis levels. Does she think standing still is good enough for Virginia or anybody else that's waiting for the treatment they need and deserve?
No, that's why we're putting in extra money to ensure that we see improved care in the NHS. But can I just remind him what the Chief Executive of NHS England, Simon Stevens, has said of our announcement? We can now face the next 5 years with renewed certainty. This multi-year settlement provides the funding we need to shape a long-term plan for key improvements in cancer, mental health and other critical services. And if he wants to talk about what the Labour Party do in relation to health service, that's where he started. Let's just look not at what they say, but what they actually do. For every £1 extra we spend on the NHS in England, Labour in Wales spend only 84p. Typical Labour, say one thing and do another.
Jeremy Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, health spending grew by 5% in Wales last year, rather more than in England. Her 3.4% is actually just 3%, as it's only for NHS England. Nothing for public health budgets, nothing for community health, or vitally, nothing for social care. This is less than is needed just to stand still. And after the longest funding squeeze in history, A&E waits are their worst ever. 4 million people now waiting on NHS waiting lists. Cancer treatment target not met for over 3 years. Nurse numbers falling, GP numbers falling, and 100,000 staff vacancies. NHS trusts $1 billion in deficit and a £1.3 billion funding gap for social care. The Prime Minister is writing IOUs just to stand still. Until this government can be straight with people where the money is coming from, why should anyone, anywhere, trust them on the NHS?
I'll tell the right honourable gentleman why people should trust us on the National Health Service. For the 70 years of the National Health Service, for 43 of those years, it has been under the stewardship of a Conservative government. We have, despite taking difficult and necessary decisions on public spending in 2010, as a result of the deficit left by the last Labour government, we have consistently put extra money into the National Health Service. We have now announced a National Health Service plan that gives it certainty of funding for the next 5 years, and working with clinicians and others in the National Health Service, we will see a 10-year plan to improve services and to improve care for patients. But can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he can stand up here all he likes and talk about the Labour Party's plans for money. But what we know is that the Labour Party's plans would bankrupt this economy. And the IFS have said Labour would not raise as much money as they claim, even in the short run, let alone the long run. In short, their plan absolutely doesn't add up. Conservatives putting more money into the National Health Service, Labour losing control of the public finances and bankrupting Britain. Fiona Bruce!
I wouldn't bring up funny numbers. That's not necessarily a bad attack, but I wouldn't bring up dodgy numbers, seeing as Theresa May had literally put out dodgy numbers on a bus. And let me show you what I mean by this. There were numbers on a bus talking about the amount of money that they were going to raise once they leave the EU. And it turned out to be somewhat laughable. But nevertheless, Prime Minister question, PMQs. Where is it? Here we are. No, that's not it. Here we are. Yeah, wait a minute. Alright, let's go to this.
A week and spend it on our priorities, such as the NHS.
But there isn't a magic money tree that we can shake that suddenly provides for everything that people want.
Yes!
One second. It's here. Yeah, I've been binge watching Galloway. Here we are.
It means extra money, significantly more money going into the NHS.
How much?
I'm just about to come on to that. I thought you might want to ask me that question. It means that at the end of 5 years, by 2023-24, there will be £20 billion more in real terms being spent on the NHS. Now, often figures like that, politicians quote figures like that, they don't often mean much to many people. Some people may remember seeing a figure on the side of a bus a while back of 350 million
pounds a week, yeah.
That in cash. Well, I can tell you that what I'm announcing will mean that in 2023-24, there will be about £600 million a week in cash, more in cash, going into the NHS.
Paul Johnson, he's in central London. He's the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Paul, thanks a lot for joining us. So, is it utter tosh?
Well, I mean, the key thing here is quite a significant promise of extra funding for the NHS. 20 billion at the end of 5 years means that it's getting back close to its long-run average increase after a very tight 8 years. Where's the money going to come from? That we don't know. One thing we do know is it's not going to come from something called a Brexit dividend.
Well, the Prime Minister says it is.
Well, it can't, because there isn't one. I mean, for two reasons. One is a simple bit of arithmetic, which is that if you look through to 2023, because of the way we're paying the Brexit divorce bill, and because of the promises the government's already made to farmers and others that will carry on spending money that the EU spends in the UK, there is literally no money. The second and even more important point is that the government has already accepted that because the economy will be hit by Brexit, that there'll be a negative effect on the public finances. There'll actually be at least £15 billion a year less to spend as a result of the Brexit vote. So in the end, this money will come from higher taxes or higher borrowing. There is not a Brexit dividend there for it to be paid with.
So why would the Prime Minister come out and say there was a Brexit dividend? As she said, 350 million a week. It was on the bus. She says it's now 600 million a week.
Well, this is playing with numbers. The 350 million a week number was always false. That isn't even the gross amount that we send to the EU. The net amount, the gross amount is nearer 250 million. The net amount's about 150 million. Secondly, that 600 million a week number that she quotes is odd, given that she has said that the extra funding is 20 billion a year. Now, if I divide 20 billion by 52 weeks, I don't get 600 million a week as, again, a simple bit of arithmetic. So I think there's some shenanigans going on there with with inflation and so on. And as I said, there isn't, certainly over this period, even from a pure bit of arithmetic, there isn't additional money there from leaving the EU. And in the longer term, because it is generally accepted, including by the government, that the economy will be smaller as a result of Brexit, there'll be less in the way of tax revenues and therefore less money to spend. We need to grow up and understand that if we want an NHS which is getting better or and is serving a bigger population, we will have to raise taxes to spend on it, not assume that money will come from somewhere else.
Okay, so that's where it's going to come from. You say no Brexit dividend, it'll come from higher borrowing and higher taxes.
Brutal, true, and effective. Dismantling in 3 minutes. So, a dismantling in 3 minutes. Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn. Google Jim Garrison. He's the only person to bring a case against the JFK assassination. Wow. Dark roast lefty. Not sure how membership in the EU works. Well, they're not. It's not a buffet. They can't choose one thing and not choose another. Yeah, they can't choose one thing and not another. So, Wall Street and Washington never really paid for the savings and loan scandal, let alone the last subprime collapse. You're right, they haven't. I mean, keep in mind when Obama went in, he just protected Wall Street. So yeah, it's like the stage left at magic show. You can see how the trick is done, but the audience is amazed. I love that. I love that. That's awesome. I love that. You can see how the trick is done, but the audience is still amazed. God, I love that. Every time I hear wankers wagging their tongues, I translate to the poor getting poorer. Every time I hear wankers wagging their tongues, I translate to the poor getting poorer. I have no idea what that means. Balthazar, best part is Labour's manifesto is fully costed, determining every pound raised and spent. Tories didn't bother to cost their manifesto so they could be flexible. They wanted to be flexible. Well, Balthazar, you heard when he asked her if she wanted to raise taxes or borrow, she didn't want to answer that question at all. She ducked and dodged and moved and moonwalked. The last thing she wanted to do was say, yes, we're going to raise taxes. But she did say, we will have moderate increases, or some she said. But it did give a nod to this idea that they were probably going to have to raise taxes. And I like what the guy said. Be an adult. If you want to have a grown-up NHS, you pay for it. You pay for it. Corbyn isn't a communist. No, fuck no, he's not a communist. I think wankers is politicians in his mind. So when politicians speak, it's just the poor getting poor. Oh, I figure. I see. UKIP is the only alternative for England. Oh, God. Please don't say that. I am Siler. UKIP has been pretty much obliterated in England. Been pretty much obliterated. Bob Ramirez said the first thing the banks do to places like Greece is try to privatize the national services. Yes, that's exactly what they do. They tell them, look, you need to get these loans, you need to privatize these services, you can't afford to do X or Y, and they cannibalize the services, giving them over to private interests. It's sad, but amazing. I'm a she, but I do shave my head. Oh, Laura, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't think I used the he or she pronoun. But if I did, I'm sorry. Do you think we define the other side according to its politicians and our side according to the citizens? And this happens on both sides. Do you think we define the other side according to its politicians? So, yes and no. And I'm going to say yes and no to this. I can only tell you how I view it. I think, from the way I see it, because I used to be a Democrat and then became something else. And so I don't necessarily see it in the typical way people see party politics. When people hear somebody talk, a politician from their side, it oozes through their brain and they ignore any kind of cognitive bias, meaning they just hear it, they absorb it, and they take it as being true because it's coming from the person who they agree with. When it's coming from somebody else, they disagree, and they show those politicians and they hold those politicians up as emblematic of this is what these people are. And by definition, if you're supporting this guy, then this is how you are. This is what you are like if you're supporting this guy that's racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever. Now, I would say Democrats and Republicans do, yes. But I don't necessarily know if everyone does. And what I mean by that is I make a distinction between the Republicans in office versus the Republicans who vote for those guys. Just like I make a distinction between Trump supporters sometimes and some of these other Republicans. I make a distinction because there's one thing of being tribal and being a part of a party versus just getting pissed off at the way things are and wanting those things to change. And voting for Trump is not the same thing as having Trump being, their godsend. Sometimes you vote, like, think of it this way. It's like everybody who supports a terrorist in a terrorist country is not a terrorist. Sometimes people who vote for Trump are just doing so because he's the fastest thing moving to be a brick in the window of the way things are. I don't coat people purely by their politician. It depends on the politician, if I'm being honest. There's some people I'm more susceptible than others. But not Trump for some reason. For some reason, I see Trump as being something else. Not him, but the people who voted for him. Because those people also voted for Obama. Meaning, whatever tendencies that Trump has, those people can't necessarily be cut with a broad brush, seeing as they had already voted for Obama in the last administration. I can't swat them as, look at all these Trump supporters. Now, Democrats do. Democrats will say these guys are racist and sexist and homophobic and, this and that. And they would, any negative name that they can hang on Trump, they would to some degree hang on the supporters because they voted for those people. They voted for Trump. I don't know if Republicans do it. But my suspicion is yes. Because it seems like to me, both parties essentially do the same thing. They're hypocrites. They function in very similar ways in the way they go about their affairs. From this disposition, looking at it, they seem to act in the same ways. And I'll give you a perfect example. Obama uses the Espionage Act to lock up whistleblowers, left and right, using more than any other administration. Trump comes in office, Trump says, I'm going to do something about these whistleblowers. And Democrats howl, oh my God, we must protect the whistleblowers, the noble, sacred whistleblowers, we must protect them. They never said squat about it during the Obama administration. So when I look at this, what am I going to say? Do Democrats really care about whistleblowers, or are they only caring about it because Trump is in office? Now, the other Democrats who are partisan hacks takes the cue from the Democrats in office, and they also howl, oh my God, Trump is going after the whistleblowers. There's certain people in the political process that are just hacks. I accept that. I don't care about those people. I try to reach the people that aren't. Some of those people who I reach will be Trump supporters. Which, again, gets across my content is humanistic in terms. And I may go after certain people, but I go after those certain people because I don't like those people being hypocrites in a political context. If you're cheating on your wife and you lie about it, okay. It's not okay if you lie about it if it has something to do with some kind of case, or something to do with policy, or something to do with you took money, or something to do with you being blackmailed, etc., etc., etc. And making a point that your private life is your private life, your public life is your public life, and if it affects me and it's in an office, yeah, it matters. Look, I think they do. I think they do. I think they torn. I think they see the politician, or they see the people in the politician, if that makes sense. David Duke was saying the same thing the other day. What? Same thing about what? Sarah Silverman retweeted how Hillary stood up for immigrants against Trump. Are you shitting me? Do you know Hillary Clinton said, send them back? Send them back. Get them out of here. We can't give them positive incentives on wanting to bring their kids to this country. She said, send them back. But now she's standing up for immigrants' rights. This is kind of what I mean. It's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. Now, I don't know if Silverman believes that or not. Either Silverman is an utter and complete hack, or she is completely delusional. I don't know which one. I don't even know which one is more terrifying, to be honest. But this is not just Silverman. This is replicated all throughout the United States. This is kind of what I mean when I say it becomes this kind of cultish, tribal thing in the way that these parties and the people in these parties deal with one another. It's all political points. It's all political point scoring. Still waiting for Jamal to have Trump on his show. I would bring him on the show. I would totally bring Trump on the show. I don't think he would come on the show. I mean, I've called him a reality show host and joked him, so I'm not sure. What I mean to say is Democrats and Republicans don't necessarily support their politicians. They just see it as left versus right. Oh, I see what you mean. Meaning the politician at some point becomes perfunctory. It's just, I'm in this party and I'm supporting the person that's associated with this party. Partially. I agree with that. Partially. The reason I said partially, because there are some times where they get a fire under them. Like where people say, yeah, I like that guy. They may be prone to vote Republican, but doesn't necessarily mean they will be fired up to vote Republican. That fired up difference between those things, I think, is the win and the loss. Like, in one of these elections, one of my friends, a libertarian, he was like, there's nobody out there for me to vote for. He wasn't motivated to vote for anybody. His bias is to vote towards the right. That's his bias. Now, if there was somebody on the left that pulled him, would he? Maybe. But his bias is towards the right. But when there's nothing that, motivates him, he's not fully into the political process. He's not all that engaged. So, I think you're right, but I think you're right with a modifier of the person being somewhat of an X factor, depending on who the person is. Yeah, I can agree with that. Totally. Good point. Very good point. Bernie is too deep in the Democratic pocket. Forget him already. The Sammy M333. I don't have that belief, man. I mean, I understand that people are somewhat hurt and broken based on Sanders not necessarily, being superhuman. But I don't have this thing of, I haven't been the disabuse of belief in the political process yet. Meaning I haven't been broken down and completely gutted in my belief that politics can work. Now, when I say that, and I think, what's the fastest thing moving? And not just the fastest thing moving. Who believes it? Like, I've gotten extraordinarily cynical of the process. And in that cynicism, I've gotten to the point of not necessarily caring about what they say, or believing less about what they say, and more about what I can somewhat demonstrate based on what the person have done, if that makes sense. Whatever you want to say about Sanders, he believes it. He believes it. Even though you may say he's in the Democratic pocket, he is out there making speeches about these wars being illegal. He is out there making speeches about job guarantees. And nobody is prodding them and pushing him. He's not doing it because it's election season. He's doing it because he believes it. There's a difference in those things. There's a massive difference in those things. The conversations that we're having right now, public option, they could even bring public option up for a conversation. And you've gotten them to jump the shark on board to Medicare for all. Yes, he decides to throw his lot in with the Democratic Party. I don't necessarily have to like it, but I do understand that if you want to get anything done, you have to work with the people around you. In that case, unfortunately, the rowboat that was available had Chuck Schumer on it. And that's the rowboat that they use to try to rally against Trump. I disagree with this thing of having a disagreement with somebody, and just because there's certain things that you disagree with, that person becomes X'd out. I don't quite get that. You're never going to agree with each and everything that a person goes along with, and you have people who have certain political beliefs that run either further to the left than yours or further to the right. And even what that means, further to the left or right, can be up for debate to some degree in some of this stuff. If you're talking about somebody who means it, now you may say he doesn't have the stones. Fair enough. You may say he doesn't have a spine. Fair enough. You can make those hits. But let's be honest. He believes it. And even if you want to say he's in the Democrats' ass, he's still, with his head in his ass, screaming about unemployment, federal jobs guarantee, Social Security, education. Doesn't shut up about it. I have no issue at all with supporting Sanders. It just is. I mean, I understand some people have some feelings about that. I have no idea why anybody has feelings about it. But between getting something done and not, I would prefer to try. And yeah, between getting something done and not, I would prefer to try. I don't necessarily have to like the fact that he's in the Democratic Party. I don't have to like the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is in the Democratic Party. But if I was in Hawaii, would I vote for? Hell yes. Would do so with bells on. I understand Sanders might have taken a hit because he's working with Democrats. I don't like the Russia nonsense. I don't like the hawkishness on Iran nonsense that he goes along with the crowd. But he's moved the dial, man. I mean, so yeah. He's moved the dial. Man to Talk with James Yoda. There's no try. There's only do. Do or do not do. There is no try. We have to listen to Jamal. We have to roll up our sleeves and get to walking the talk. Walking the talk. Look, I guess I think it's slightly unfair that people look at him as being something more than just a man. He's just a man. I don't necessarily think that's necessarily a bad thing to be. We be angels. We say, nay, we are but men. Men fail at times. They fuck up. They make bad decisions. Sometimes the decisions they make are perfectly right from the standpoint of action and consequence, but it's not necessarily something that people like to see. There's all sorts of pressures that are associated with what was taking place during those primaries. There just was. I can't hold it all against them. Yeah, I can't hold it against them like that. I have to be fair. Hey, hun, I watched in hopes of seeing Jamal evolve on Bernie. Evolve on Bernie? I haven't changed my perspective on Sanders. I mean, I have two perspectives on Sanders. They're somewhat they're not diametrically opposed. Both are true, even though it depends on the narrative that you believe is more right. Sanders is sheepdogging people to the Democratic Party. Sanders is trying to get people into the party because he believes that he himself has a good chance of winning that election. That's what I think. I think the whole reason of being this outreach coordinator is him thinking, I have a chance to win, and the only way I can win is through the party system. That means, however, that you're somewhat constrained in the way you go about your affairs. If you want to run in the party, you're going to have to be constrained. You can't be this loose cannon that you were in the primaries. But the thing that made people love you was the fact that you were the loose cannon. So there's a political juggling that takes place in this process. Sanders, it's like, what do you do at that point? He believes his chances are in the party. I don't necessarily like it, but he believes his chances are in the party. My other feeling on this, or my other thought on this, is aside from him believing he can do it in the party, it's a gamble. Like, it's a gamble where everything is on the table on one person. It's like $100 on Sanders. That's essentially what it feels like. If Sanders doesn't win, if he doesn't make it, then those people would have been sheepdogging the party, and do those people end up going to whoever is in the party that beats him? Does Sanders support Kamala Harris if it doesn't work? Does all the support drain from the left? Because that's the only boat that seems to be running on the left. You see what I'm saying here? I mean, the sheepdog thing is pushing people into the party. But what happens if those people get pushed into the party and Sanders doesn't win? That's what I'm getting at. It's all on Sanders. So, if he does win, wow, because I think he'll beat the stuffing out of Trump. But if he doesn't, it dissolves. It dissolves. I think it dissolves, personally. Kamala Harris, the ICE supporter, my God, yeah, imagine that shit. Not just ICE supporter, also asset forfeiture, stealing people's properties before they even are arrested, like put on trial or anything. Yeah. Democrats are not going to save anyone. No, I don't think they are. I would never vote for a Democrat or Republican, but I always vote the order of chaos. You know, it's funny. I feel the same way. Like, I feel like it's too important not to. Even if I have to write in something, I feel like it's too important not to. I hope they cheat the shit out of him, guaranteeing the rise of a different party. Tim Flobuck, that's the other thing, right? I thought that myself. I said, and what happens if they cheat him? What happens? Like, so everybody sees the cheating the first time around. The second time around, people are primed for it. I mean, the media couldn't even ignore it. I mean, you have people asking questions to Tom Perez about cheating and rigging the election. What happens if something like that happens the second time around? I think you would have an outright revolt. And in that scenario, does Sanders back away from the party, or does Sanders submit? If Sanders submit, I would be done. I would be done. I something. I don't know what it would be, but I'd something. I put an X behind it. Our future might be doomed. John Doe, I assume that it is. But I assume that it is an optimistic way that at some point further down the line, somebody is brighter and smarter than us organize themselves in a way that's sane and rational in the way they use resources. It may not be us. It's no skin off my nose to vote. It is one day. It takes no effort. I never work on election day. I had chemistry lab on one election and I told my professor no fucking way. Good on you. Gabbard Fetterman, or Fetterman Gabbard 2020. Think outside the box. Litmus test. Again, Bernie wins 2020 nomination. Dark roast. Jamal starts Star Trek stream after election. Yay, the Sammy 33. Look, guys, I like. Oh, Wesley, what's happening, Wesley? And thank you, Wesley. I appreciate it. What do you think about space colony traveling for asteroids and collecting resources? I think that we spend far too much money on military. I think that if we had a society where we made sure our needs were met, meaning we're not post-scarcity. We don't have billionaires. We have post-scarcity. We have a system where resources are distributed equitably. Not necessarily saying we don't have wealth disparity because the world is imperfect. But at the very least, there's no poverty. There's no poverty. People are not living these difficult, hard lives, in which case they're weighed down in debt just to get an education, or just to make ends meet. What happens when we get to the point where we're post-scarcity? Where do we look to? Like, think about that for a moment. Like, you have all the resources you need to do all sorts of things. The problem that gets in the way is money. Ultimately, if people were just free to do things, or if you were organized in a different way, the resources would be there. Your problem is money. Money is the hindrance to getting shit done. If you were organized in a different way, where you weren't spending $1 trillion on military, think of the shit that you can do. Think of what you can use those resources for. If you're talking about going mining in space, why not? Post-scarcity. People have the things that they need. You can look up to higher things. The planet itself can start looking up into higher things. Think about what takes place when education becomes free. And you have all these people that are in all these war zones all throughout the world with the capacity to go to school for as long as they want. Think of what takes place when you have a world that's not necessarily broken up into war, but the world is post-scarcity. And that world has been getting educations up to doctorates all across the planet. What happens? I'm making this point, this thing of space colonies and everything else. At some point, once your issues are solved on Earth, when people ask, well, what would I do if I was post-scarcity? You would look up to higher and more intricate things. And one of those things would be space. Guarantee you, it would be space. We live difficult and short lives. And massively unempathetic in the way we go about our affairs. If that wasn't the case, and it doesn't have to be the case, I think we would look for higher goals, higher aspirations. And I think if you start having questions of where can we get minerals from, where can we get energy from, where can we do this, the space thing just kind of pops out at a certain point. Yeah, I think those things will be ideal. We have to get past scarcity. You have to get past scarcity. And by the way, spending the $1 trillion dollars a year in military, not to mention the billions of dollars that other countries. We're spending money just to blow shit up. It's amazing. We need to convert our weaponry into livingry. I love that. Weaponry into livingry. I love it. Alright, guys. I'm going to end this here. This has gone on for like an hour. So, thank you all for coming. What we started this as questions to the Prime Minister. Questions to the Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn, Theresa May. Having to go at one another. Look, at the end of the day, Theresa May can't answer that question of are you going to raise taxes or are you going to increase borrowing? But that question is the right question to ask, seeing as Theresa May having going around telling people that something that wasn't true. So I want to end it with that summary, and you guys have a good night. And let me make sure I was missing this the other day. Wesley Walker, thank you very much. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, guys.